Hey guys, Kevin here with etrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Go Power RV converter and smart battery charger. A converter charger is going to convert the AC current that comes from your shore power line or from your generator, and then it's going to convert that down to DC power so that you can charge your batteries while you're at the campsite or at your house, and then also run those DC appliances without draining the battery all the way down. If you look at the side of your converter, you're going to see that there's these little fuses in here and there's these little screws next to it. If you ever have to replace any of these, you're going to need to make sure that you loosen up those screws. That'll allow you to pop out the fuse, put the new one in, and then you'll want to retighten those screws, but you don't want to over tighten them. And what these fuses are your reverse battery polarity protection, so that's going to protect you in the event that you hook up the battery incorrectly. It's not going to send back a issue to the converter and blow it out. It'll instead blow out that fuse and you'll be good to go as soon as you replace it. It's also going to have a brownout input protection, and overcurrent protection, and then also an over temperature protection. So in the event that it overheats, it will cut off the power to this. So basically, if your fan ever went out for whatever reason, or if the temperature was just too hot in whatever kind of box you put it in, wherever you were actually able to install it, that's just basically going to protect your unit overall. This converter charger is going to have 4 different charge modes to make sure that your battery is properly being charged at each level that it's at. The main one is going to be your bulk, and that's going to be your full load. It's basically going to handle the bulk of the charging, which is why it's called the bulk. That's going to get your capacity of your battery up to about 80 to 90%. Once it hits that 80 to 90%, it's going to switch over to absorption mode, which is going to ensure that it's actually going to get a full charge up to 100%. And there's also going to be a float mode, which is going to just maintain that charge and replace it from the normal battery discharge that's going to happen. And then there's also equalization mode, and this is going to be really good for when you're storing your RV. It's going to help prevent stratification and sulfate buildup. Sulfate buildup is what you'll see typically on batteries. You'll see all those crystals start to kind of form on the terminals, and what this does is it's going to send a specific voltage to kind of help prevent that. And then for the stratification, that's typically going to be acid buildup on the bottom of the battery. So sending a specific charge just to kind of combat that is going to help keep your battery in working order. So the placement of your converter charger is going to be pretty important. You don't want to put it next to your batteries, and you don't want to put it next to anything that can be flammable. Now, this isn't going to arc or make any sparks or anything like that, like some other inverters or converters can do, but it's still just best to keep it nice and safe. Keep it in a nice waterproof area. You don't want any water getting in there because this is all electronics. So with ours today, it's the perfect placement for it because there's all the other electronics in this sealed compartment. As far as installation goes, this can be very simple, or it can be pretty challenging. If you're swapping up to a higher amperage converter, you are going to need to make sure that you are also swapping up your wire gauge, because if the gauge isn't enough, it's not going to properly support that voltage that goes through there, and you can end up burning the wire out, ruining your breaker, ruining your converter and your charger, and also just causing electrical fire. So you're going to want to make sure that you check all of your components, make sure that your circuit breakers, your wiring, everything is up to the standards listed in the instruction manual for your converter. Now that we've gone over some of the specifics of our converter charger, let's go ahead and show you how we installed it. Starting off for installation, there are a few things that you're going to need to look at before you go ahead and just swap out your old converter with a new one. So with our one today, it's going to have a 100 amp converter, and on this one, it's going to only be a 75. So we do need to check our wiring, make sure that everything's going to be a thick enough gauge so that we can actually properly transfer that power without it burning out the wires or popping any circuits. So along with that, we also have our AC side. That's where our power is going to come into our converter. And on this one, it's simply only a 15 amp outlet on our old one. So I did have to run a new one because we are going to need 20 amp for our 100 amp converter charger. So I ran a new outlet. You're going to want to make sure that you do that and that you have this outlet solely only for that charger. If you put anything else on it, then you're going to run the risk of damaging your converter, and it's going to constantly want to pop that breaker on you, and you don't want to have that. Starting with the removal of our old converter, we're going to want to go on our battery and just remove all of our cables running over to it. We don't want any power coming to or from our battery, and then we can go ahead and remove the AC side so that there's nothing coming into our converter. And then we can take out our negative and our positive. Those loose enough, we can pull those wires out and kind of just pull them apart from each other. Same thing with our ground. We can go ahead and unmount our old converter. Now that out of the way, I went ahead and I shot one screw into one of the old holes that we had there. Obviously, the mounting pattern is probably not going to be the same as our old one, so I will have to do new holes. I'm just going to use some self-tapping screws, but if you had access to the other side, you could obviously just use some bolts and nuts as well. I've shot one screw in just to kind of hold this up in place, so it's a little bit easier to shoot the rest in. Just line that up. And we're pretty close to our old one, just not quite there. So I'll have to kind of offset that just a bit so we don't widen that hole too much. Gone ahead and just use a little bit of painter's tape to kind of hold this in place, make it a little bit easier since I don't have a second set of hands. If you do, definitely go ahead and utilize that. And then once you have those two bottom ones in, it'll be real easy to shoot in the top ones. Now we can go ahead and use our wires. I've already checked, this is 3-gauge wire, so it's going to be strong enough, or thick enough I should say, to accommodate our 100 amp converter. So we don't have to run new wires, luckily. If we did not have a thick enough gauge, based on the capacity of our converter, we would need to run new wires over to our battery. So that is something you're going to need to look at. But we can go ahead and hook in our power, our ground, and our negative. Stick our ground in first and just tighten down that screw. Probably line that up a bit more, get it out of the way. You want to make sure you get these nice and tight in here, that way you don't have any loose connections, have any arcing, or have it actually pop out of the terminal. You can give it a little bit of a yank too, just to make sure it's fully in. So now that the DC side's hooked up, we can go ahead and hook in our AC side. And I went ahead also and just put a little note on there saying, hey, converter only, don't use this outlet for anything else, because we don't want anything else running to that circuit breaker. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this so that it also blocks that top outlet. If you had a single outlet, you could also use that. It's just, this was what we had already in stock here, so that's what we went with. So within 18 inches of the battery side, we are going to have to put a circuit breaker in. That's just going to help protect our battery in the event that our converter tries to push more than 100 amps. And we're going to make sure that we also have the corresponding amperage for that circuit breaker. So I'm putting in a 100 amp circuit breaker. This one's real easy to use. If it ever senses that it's going over 100 amps, it's going to pop this little lever. You can easily push it back in to reset it and be good to go. But we'll go ahead and we're going to mount this so that the load side is going to be facing our converter, and then the line side is going to be running up to our battery. And then I've also gone ahead and made a little jumper cable to run between the battery and our circuit breaker, since the old cable that ran from our converter over to our battery is going to be on here. I'm just going to mount this right here, and like I said, I try to face it so that it's easier to put the ring terminals up, because a lot of the times when you get in a huge gauge, it's real hard to kind of get these ring terminals to actually fit on these. I'm just using self-tapping screws again because there's a metal wall here. When you're doing this, be real careful. I've had a few of these break on me before just because this whole liner here is just plastic, so it's real easy to push too hard and actually snap it. There we go. Just tight is all you want. You don't want to go any further because, like I said, you will break that plastic. So now we can go ahead and hook up our cables. Like I said, you want to have the line coming from the converter on the line side and the load side to our battery. It's a little tough with these larger gauges to really get it to sit right. kind of have to fight it. And we'll just use the included nut and lock washer that comes with the breaker here. Secure it in place. Now they got that on their handset, I'm gonna come back and just tighten that down fully with the wrench. And now we can take our jumper, and I kind of had it set so that it'd be easier to get on here. Let's remember exactly what side I had. I think it was this way. Yeah. All right, now that we got that up, I'm gonna go ahead, do the same thing. We'll use that nut. Tighten it down. And do the same thing on our battery side. So our old converter was right here. It was on this double twin 15 amp. Obviously, like I was saying earlier, you can't use a 15 amp with this specific converter, so we did have to upgrade it to a 20. So I went ahead and I swapped it over here just because I wouldn't be able to run the other wires that were on this twin over to this side. So I did have to run new wires for that outlet. We've got it in place, and once we flip this on, we can go ahead and start plugging in our camper and making sure that our converter actually works. With everything in place and all of our circuit breakers on, I've gone ahead and hooked up to our shore power, and as you can see, this little light here indicates that our converter is on and correctly working. Well, I think about does it for today's look at the Go Power RV converter and smart battery charger. My name's Kevin. Thanks for watching.